Welcome to Crit and Crit. I am Axion,
I'm Scint.
and welcome to Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Just in time for Halloween. We will be starting on this particular game as we begin discussing the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker.
But before we get into the novel, we should probably address the elephant, or as you'd like, wolf/bat in the room. Vampires and the myths around them. At this point, vampires are a pretty long-standing horror movie stock monster part of pop culture, and there have been many, many different forms that vampires have taken. So, I guess we can start with Axion. What is the first vampire you remember?
So,
I don't mean the first one to come to mind now, I mean like the first one you encountered.
Alright, so I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and I grew up on Looney Tunes. So the first vampire I ever remember encountering was Count Bloodcount from the episode of Looney Tunes where Bugs Bunny is stuck in a castle with a vampire. The one where he keeps going, abracadabra, and the vampire turns into a bat. And then he goes hocus pocus, and the vampire turns back into a vampire. And then it gets weirder from there.
Yep. Because it's Bugs Bunny. So, I'm not sure if the first one I saw taught me the importance of counting, or told me to buy cereal that would rot my teeth. I, of course, mean Count Von Count from Sesame Street, and Count Chocula. So, those are a pretty far cry from the menace that Dracula himself presents in his self-named novel. But there are a lot of superstitions and characteristics that surround most vampire myths these days. One of which obviously would have to be the whole bat association that you had mentioned. And that Count Chocula would have because the marshmallows look like little bats.
Speaking of bats,
Player character go down the hole. I like the fact that we have a guy named Graves in a game about fighting undead.
Yep.
So yeah, what are some other myths associated with vampires that come to mind for you?
Myths or pop culture?
Traits, I guess.
Okay, traits. Well, the big one is vampires can't be in the sun. They will die or turn to ash or burn or otherwise can't be out in the sun. They can't stand to be exposed to garlic, to religious symbols, usually crosses, but some more recent depictions do expand that to any sort of religious symbol. Sometimes they have a vulnerability to silver, I think, though that's usually more associated with werewolves. They are extremely difficult to kill. Usually they require a stake through the heart, sometimes also to be beheaded. Ow. They... sometimes they can't cross running water. They have to... They sleep during the day, usually in a coffin. Oh, I need that. I can't do anything with it until I get a second card. Anyway, those are the big ones off the top of my head.
Yep. And it's kind of interesting how some of these things have come into being. Some of these historical origins are more depressing than others. So the physical appearances of vampires, pale skin, elongated claws and teeth, were, I believe, born out of just the natural decomposition of the body shortly after death. When your skin starts to contract, it looks as though your hair has grown, it looks as though your fingernails have grown because the skin's grown back a bit, and your gums recede, so your teeth look more prominent, giving the appearance of fangs. Of course, you look pale in death. So it's a lot to do with that. I've been very addicted to the Ask a Mortician channel, and she's done a little bit of talking about the vampire panic, which is actually quite relevant to Dracula, because the New England vampire panic happened right around the time Dracula was being written, and I believe Stoker had been visiting the country while it was happening. So it might have colored some of his perceptions with how he decided to characterize some of the things in his novel. But that's the less depressing origin for some of these myths, as I have found while doing some research for this. Do you want to take a spin on the wheel of people being terrible to guess?
I mean, we can just start at the top of the usual suspects and go down the list.
Okay.
So, probably a bit of racism, probably a bit of xenophobia, probably a bit of insert phobia of religion or culture of choice here.
But what would that one be? Take a guess. Remember, this was written by a white European guy.
In that case, probably either Muslims or Jewish people.
Anti-Semitism. Yeah, I'm actually completely unaware of that because, like I said, my first exposure to vampires was a cartoonish purple felt monster telling me that there is one key on the table, and I didn't see anything harmful about that at all. He's the count and he is counting. So, yeah, and I honestly, until I had stumbled across something related to this, saying, as a heads up, there are a lot of vampire traits that are rooted in anti-Semitism, I was like, what, really? So I googled it, and there's actually a pretty scholarly research into the connections for that, such as, there is a Yiddish folk creature, let me find it, that you need to invite inside. The it looks like.
I forgot about the can't enter a house unless invited bit. I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, I had never heard of this folk creature, so I didn't know that was connected.
I've only heard of it in D&D, where it is a demonic possessing spirit that steals corpses.
Yep. And a malicious spirit and soul removed from a dead person, notably said to be male spirits that possess virginal women on the eve of their wedding. Oof. We'll talk about that when we get to the plot. Let's see, I had not heard of something called the blood libel, which was the really nasty rumor that, Jewish people kidnap children and drink their blood.
Yeah,
so,
that one's actually still alive. Look up...
Are you serious?
Yep.
It's 2022!
It's the basis for QAnon.
Well, who gives a crap about QAnon? They're all idiots over there.
The entire Republican Party.
Okay, but yeah, I was not aware of this as a stupid belief, and I am not going to budge from that. You have to be
Oh, it's
brain dead to
absolutely a
believe it.
stupid belief. It 100% is. It's just unfortunately a stupid belief that's still believed.
Of course. But yeah, so...
I was not
really,
aware
that's-
of it having a connection to vampires, but I was aware of blood libel.
Well, consider what vampires are said to do.
I mean, no,
Vampires
in
kidnap
hindsight,
people
it
and
makes,
suck their blood.
no, in hindsight, it makes perfect sense, and I can't believe I didn't connect those two before.
Well, I'd not heard of this stupid idea, but as soon as I saw it described, like, oh yeah, that sounds like a vampire, so I can absolutely see the connection between anti-Semitic rhetoric and traditional depictions of vampires, which is, again, ridiculous to me in modern days, because one, it's a stupid idea that you have to be stupid to believe in. I will keep saying that, I don't care how redundant it is. You should feel bad at how stupid you are for believing something that easily disproven with common frickin' sense. Sorry. But,
No. You're not wrong.
But yeah, there's all the fact that, Dracula is himself described as having a hooked nose, which is a common depiction, so it's something I'm surprised I didn't pick up on when I read it, because I've heard that one way too much. So, but yeah, I feel, and honestly, it's really strange looking at this, because today, vampires have changed so much and been depicted so many different ways that they're basically completely removed, I think, from this origin of the aftermath of the diaspora, and they're coming in here and changing our traditions and not doing things the way we want them to. That we still hear over and over again with insert modern bugaboo here. So, yeah, I mean, like, can you imagine you having the Twilight vampires looked at in the same lens? Actually, I can, but it's usually looking at it through a different lens of Mormonism, but that's a live journal post for another day.
Yep. And
I've linked that to you, I think.
yes, you have many times. Well, no, not many times, but I've heard it many times, just not necessarily from you. But yes, I'm very familiar with the live journal review of Twilight, and I'm gonna be blunt. We're probably going to do further Castlevania games in the future, and Twilight is probably going to be paired with one of them, because I don't have a lot of other games that involve vampires.
But yeah, I just bring them up as an example because, well, it's an example, like, you think about that, you don't really think about anti-Semitic stereotypes. You think about why are they freaking sparkling? Which, whatever.
There's a lot of questions to be asked, but I mean, even then, even ignoring Twilight and how it doesn't really play into a lot of the stereotypes and traditions that are associated with vampire stories in the modern sense, you can look at the stories that do, like, well, Castlevania. Castlevania's been having games for 20, 30 years now. Oh, no, it's... yeah, 30 years. Because the earliest Castlevania game came out in either the late 80s, very, very late 80s or early 90s. I don't remember when the NES Castlevania came out precisely. But it would have been somewhere in that area, and it's now 2022.
Yeah, I will admit to knowing very little about Castlevania. Like, I know the basic concept is you go fight Dracula and stuff.
But anyway.
But mostly what I know is a miserable pile of secrets, I despise Castlevania birds, and that one Drawfee episode where they draw Dracula characters and Julia deletes her art.
Which, that was based on the Netflix Castlevania series, which was the next thing I was going to mention, is not only do you have all these games that go back 30 years now, but there was just recently a animated Netflix series about Castlevania, loosely based on Castlevania 3, which was a prequel game compared to 1 and 2. And it kind of told that first story of Dracula and the Belmont family, and all that fun stuff. Stuff that is noticeably missing from Circle of the Moon because it's kind of a semi-non-canon game compared to
I take it back. There's one other thing I know about Castlevania. Unraveled decided what the new sexiest monster was.
Yeah, the Alron, if I remember correctly, was the one that won that particular contest.
Yeah, because he ruled out basically anything that already looked basically humanoid because that's just taking the easy route.
Yep, which, again, from D&D, I am very familiar with Alrons. I had
Yeah,
one
so am I. You did that in our campaign.
I was about to say, I had a rather prominent Alron NPC in one of my campaigns. Anyway.
We have some wild D&D stories that have nothing to do with this, so... But, yeah.
D&D is probably going to still get mentioned a lot on this show, just especially in books like this, where it's relevant to the discussion. D&D, and by extension Pathfinder, and other similar games that sit in that fantasy, role-playing, mythological space, have no shortage of vampires influenced by all manner of different mythologies and different sources and different worldviews and cultures, but the quote-unquote default vampire is almost always based on the European traditions that built heavily into Dracula.
And since Dracula was as successful as it was, Dracula basically codified the idea of a vampire.
Yep, that's what I was about to say, was the trope codifier for vampirism in the cultural
and that
zeitgeist.
carries over into the Dresden Files, where there are 3 different types of vampire. The Black Court are the traditional Dracula-style ones, and Butcher actually says that in universe, Dracula was published so people would be able to kill them. Then there's the White Court, which are succubi and incubi, and I don't remember what White Court's based off of, but they generally just cause plot problems.
If I remember correctly, they are sort of a demon-based, sort of based on another author's vampires, and sort of their own completely unique thing.
Okay, that's fair. It's been a bit, but yeah, vampires are such an influential creature, even removed from their questionable origins of stupid logic, that it's really hard to remember or even learn, because I didn't know until I was doing some background for this episode, that they had such a checkered past, because they're just now interesting fantasy villains, like vampires versus werewolves, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Twilight,
Underworld.
Underworld,
Castlevania.
Yeah. And I don't think those tropes, I don't think those tropes of xenophobia and racism, etc., are really that consciously present in these. They're just running off of the monster movies, because I think that's actually what people think of more than the books, which as an English teacher I have mixed feelings on, because on the one hand, please read books, they're good for you. On the other hand, I think most movie adaptations have not carried over the same anti-Semitic rhetoric in how Dracula is portrayed. So that's a step forward. No, then again, I haven't really watched too many of the movies myself, so I could be off base and not know something that's been prominently shown, so take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, point is, times have changed. Most people do not know of the origin of many of these vampire myths and traits, so just, I don't know. It's important to keep in mind, I think, just because parroting things that aren't true, as we've mentioned, can have lasting ripple effects that cause legitimate harm to people who didn't do anything except exist. But yeah, it's going to be hard not to have mentioning. We have to mention some of these traits as we go through the plot because, well,
they're plot relevant.
Yeah, Stoker codified them. They're important to the plot. We have to talk about them, but
we don't have
here's
to like
our
them.
disclaimer. Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about D&D, like, we probably should put a moratorium on that now, because otherwise I will spend the entire plot recap saying my priest of Kellenborg would beat all these people around the head with a newspaper because they're idiots. But yeah, I can't think of anything else to add right now, so turning it over to you.
The main thing I would mention about Dracula as a story is that it has been so thoroughly imported into the cultural understanding that the entire book is essentially already spoiled just from what everyone knows about vampires from cultural osmosis.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking of that text post that was going around Tumblr of the characters in Dracula create comedy because they don't realize that they are characters in Dracula. That
was actually exactly what I was about to quote. The entire story is building up this. It's more a mystery novel than a horror, though it does have horror elements. But, the whole thing is about you have this mysterious situation with people dying and going missing and strange things happening and, this bizarre, wealthy stranger showing up and people being found in bizarre circumstances with no information about what's going on and all of the building blocks for a murder mystery, but anybody reading it in the modern day is going in knowing what the answer to the mystery is because it's Dracula.
I just want to quote this real quick. The people in the village are warning me about a local legend called a vampire. How quaint. When I meet Count Dracula, I shall have to ask him if he knows about this. It's great.
But yeah, the book is called Dracula. Even if you've never seen a Dracula movie, you've never read the book, just from growing up in our society surrounded by things like Castlevania and Twilight and Anne Rice and Vampire the Masquerade and countless other cultural touchstones that have just built the basic concepts of Dracula and all of the information and all of the secrets of that story into the basic understanding of society with regards to the concept of the vampire as a mythological, fantastical creature. There are next to no surprises to be had reading Dracula. Everything that happens is something 90% of people in the Western world are going to have already known about and had spoiled to them just by existing in a space that has so much cultural concepts built off of this idea.
I did find something else I wanted to mention. I have one serious note and one not at all serious note. What would you like me to start with?
Start with the silly one first.
Apparently, according to a Tumblr thing that came up while I was looking for the other important thing, Coca-Cola was invented in 1886, the story is set in 1897, which means you can absolutely hint at Coca-Cola in any and all fanworks around the book's time period. So, you could absolutely have our vampire hunting squad, Sherry Coke, which at the time did not have a replacement for its namesake, as they go hunt the vampire. As to the more serious thing, it's very common to attribute Dracula as being Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. But apparently Dracula, the name, happened just because after Stoker had written the book, he stumbled across the name and said, that sounds pretty cool, I'm going to name my vampire that. So there's not really an intentional connection between Vlad Tepes and Dracula, and from the little I saw while quickly getting information before we did this episode, he was none too popular in Romania after this was published, because, yeah. Dracula, I believe, was a corruption of the translation for a Christian, I think, Order of the Dragon? So he basically took the name of a pretty prestigious honor and made it into a blood-sucking monster symbol of xenophobia. But he I think the dog is upset with you.
Just a tad.
But yeah, that's all I can really think to say on this intro before we get into the other intro.
And perfect timing. Because there goes the first boss.
Sad puppy.
Poor Cerberus. He just wanted to be a good boy.
But yeah, until next time.
See y'all next time.